Hello, I'm TD Desso.
And I'm Ron Rucker.
Welcome to the Connecting Theology podcast, live from Fishbowl Studios.
The Connecting Theology podcast is presented by the Warren Theological Foundation.
Our mission is to bring together broad theological perspective on contemporary issues for the benefit of the church and the academy. For 2 years, our foundation has published the Warren Journal of Theology, a quarterly theological journal. Subscribe or donate at our website, WarrenTheology.org. Well, here we are. Now we've started a podcast, one additional way to carry out our mission of disseminating scholarly content.
And we'd like to give a thanks to our sponsors and partners who are the Dallas Bible Theological Institute. You can visit their website at dbti.org, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, and the Westmont Moriah Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. And you can become a sponsor of this initiative and create a good and lasting partnership with Warren. Visit our website at WarrenTheology.org.
Awesome. So today is Holy Saturday, a very important day during Passion Week, when we reflect on the death of Jesus Christ. Our one and our top question for today's episode is, how does the death of Christ and what it accomplished for the believer, how does that contribute to our beliefs about the value of human life? That is our primary question that we'll be connecting all other questions to. So today we are excited to have as our guest, my friend, the venerable, the awesome, Akinlabi Adewuyi. A few things about our friend and our guest. He, a couple of years ago, in our very first issue of the Warren Journal, Akinlabi wrote an awesome paper titled Religious Liberty and COVID-19 Restrictions in the State of California, a case study of Grace Community Church. This paper he wrote at the height of the pandemic. Akinlabi has several degrees, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Bowie State University, a Master of Divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I greatly appreciate his scholarship and can't wait to hear his perspective as we continue conversations from that article.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
So I'm excited for our first podcast episode and excited to have you here today. So let's get into it, Akinlabi. What's your initial thoughts on the topic? What's your initial thoughts?
Well, thank you for having me, and also thank you for the opportunity to be here and to be able to speak to this topic, the death of Christ and what it accomplished for the believers. I thought it's very relevant. First of all, because today is Holy Saturday, and not just that, but also, the importance of it. What Christ did. In my head, I'm thinking about, the sacrifice, the propitiation, the redemption, and of course the reconciliation that Christ did. So those are the four things that goes through my head as I think about this topic real quick.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, of course, in line with the title of our show, Connecting Theology, we always want to connect theological concepts to things that matter in the world. Now, we want to try to connect this concept of the death of Christ and what it accomplished. We want to try to connect that to the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
Now, you're listening or watching, and I know you're thinking, I thought we were done with COVID. Well, in a way, we are done with it, but we're not done with the after effects of it. And there are churches, not just in the United States, but globally, who are still trying to navigate this post-pandemic society. So, to modify the question a little bit, in our post-pandemic context, how does the death of Christ and what it accomplished for the believer contribute to our beliefs about the value of human life?
Thank you for that question. I guess a couple of things, just so we fully understand the importance, or even to appreciate this question. I think we should talk about, why the death of Christ. Because without truly understanding the effect of sin on the world, without truly understanding what sin did, we may not appreciate, the death of Christ. We may not appreciate what it accomplished. But even much more, when we bring this in light of COVID, and the aftermath of it and what's going on in the world, we may not even further appreciate it. There are a couple of things. I think there are 4 things I kind of want to make as statements. I think the atoning work of Christ, has 4 effects, 4 things specifically that, it did for us. But before I talk about that, I want to say 4 things that we deserve. One is we deserve to die as the penalty of sin. Obviously, sin came into the world because we disobeyed God, but, Genesis and all of those, and, and mankind became sinners, and everyone that comes or been given birth through, are product of sin. So we deserve to die. We deserve to bear God's wrath, which is against sin, not necessarily against us. We were separated from God by our sins, and of course, because of that, we're in bondage to sin and to the kingdom of Satan. So 4 things that the death of Christ did. One is the sacrifice. The death of Christ paid the penalty of death that we deserve because of our sins. The death of Christ, removed us from the wrath of God, which is propitiation. It basically paid that penalty. And of course, reconciled us back to God because, in the beginning, there is that union with God. We were separated. So the death of Christ reconciled us back to God, took away the separation. And of course, we were redeemed. Redeemed from the bondage of sin and the bondage of Satan. Now, the redemption, is deep because, we're created to be eternal people, eternal being, not necessarily on this side of the world alone, but also in eternity to come. Now, how does all of this relate, especially with the aftermath of COVID-19? I think that's a very important thing to think about because COVID-19, like any other disease, came true and claimed lives. Not only did he claim lives, but he also, we're still wrestling with it. There is a bunch of distrust that we find around. If someone just coughed right now, see how close we are. Someone just coughed, like,
That's a good point.
oh no.
Oh, yeah.
But even beyond that, there are lives that were lost. People are still mourning the loss of their friends and
that's,
all of those. So,
if I heard of, for example, and this is just one example of many. I've heard of a certain person who lost like 6 family members, all due to COVID. So, in the midst of when you have a society that has experienced so much loss of life, and we're in the Easter season, we're in the resurrection season, where we're talking about the death of Christ and what it accomplished. did COVID-19 make us think about death more? Yeah.
No, I mean, while COVID was going on, just looking on social medias and all that, there are a bunch of questions that were going on. Is this the end of the world?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is death here? You know, are we going to live past this? Especially as those scientists were putting out data that, you know, of course, they all got corrected and, you know, reversed as, you know, further understanding came about the virus. But yes, COVID-19 did make us think about death a lot more, and even much more, you know, the whole concept of life after death became, you know, topics to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But even much more, I mean, I want to say that, you know, especially with all we experience in the world, you know, on a daily basis, I think the topic of death, the topic of, you know, life after death is not something too far away from us, you know. But the death of Christ definitely does have something to say to that.
So what does it have to say to it?
Well, thank you for asking that. So the death of Christ, you know, like I said earlier, one of the things it did was it reconciles us. So if we are created to be an eternal being, which we are, which means there is life after this temporary stay on this side of eternity, you know, then, you know, the death of Christ accomplished a great thing because it reconciles us with God. We will not be separated from God, but we will be in union with God even after life. So there's a little bit of comfort that we ought to have in there, you know, in the knowledge, knowing that, you know, once we are done on this side of eternity, you know, we get to stay with God, we get to live with God, not separated from God, not in bondage, I mean, in punishment because of sin, but, you know, in the place of rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, but did it make it seem from COVID-19 that we valued human life more from our perspective as our mortality, or did it draw us nearer to the cross? Jesus' death.
Well,
Wait, Jesus' death or the many deaths due to
The
COVID?
many deaths, but did we highlight it based on our mortality, or did we draw nearer to the cross? Does it make, you know?
okay.
Which view would you say, or both?
The death, will you repeat that one more time? I just want to make sure I'm getting it.
You know, because he was asking in our post-pandemic content, how does the death of Christ and what it accomplished for the believer contribute to our beliefs about the value of human life? So would you say our belief was geared more towards a focus on our mortality, or did we draw nearer to the cross because of what we were going through?
Well,
Or both?
Well, thank you. I think let me make sure I understand this. So the death during COVID, does it draw us towards Christ the more, or does it just place its effort on mortality? Yeah. So I don't necessarily think anyone truly, without the help of the Holy Spirit, without the gospel message, can truly come to Christ.
Okay.
You know, I don't think so. And I do think that that's one of the things that I hope and I was wishing or wanting or praying for, that the church would have, you know, take a front row, you know, during COVID-19, you know, because we sort of kind of take a back step a little bit. You know, yes, there were deaths and everybody was kind of afraid. But then again, there's a bunch of questions that, you know, COVID-19 present the opportunity to be able to present not just the gospel message, but also for us to be, you know, what God wants us to be in the world.
And he brought out where I was going.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doc.
Oh, I was gonna say that COVID and any other catastrophic event, whether it be a hurricane or whatever, it offers opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the church still has the role of presenting the gospel both in word and in action.
Indeed, yes.
And then we get, and that draws us to what you wrote about. So your paper, you specifically talked about how some churches responded to COVID-19 restrictions. And one particular church, Grace Community Church, which is in California.
Yes.
Very prominent church, very prominent pastor, John MacArthur.
Yes.
They were defiant to the COVID-19 restrictions at the height of the pandemic. Now, and I'm going to try to be unbiased in everything. There are some people who looked at that and they thought about, well, what about those people's lives? For those people who were defiant against COVID-19 restrictions, there's that theological question, or at the least philosophical question of, do they value life as much as they should? And do the death of Christ, how does the death of Christ help us to value life? Does the death of Christ cause us to be more cautious with life, or should the death of Christ cause us to be less cautious with life? Well, I am a Christian. I know what's going to happen to my soul after I die. So, who cares if I die or not? Because during that time, there were people making that theological argument that, well, we're Christians. We're not afraid to die because we know. So what's your take? And I know that's not a perfectly formulated question, but just what's your take on?
Well, that's a lot of questions, but I'm gonna try to get into it as much as possible.
Okay.
Well, so in my paper, I argued that there are three institutions: the family, the government, and of course the church. Right. And they stand separately. Of course, there are times where they crosses each other, and but then again there is the distinct, separation, especially particularly between the church and the state, and my argument in the paper was not necessarily to say that what GCC did was constitutionally wrong. But my argument was to say that, there are some biblical deficiencies in their positions, that sort of kind of diminish a little bit, if I could, our witness in the world, So when we think about, COVID-19 and the position that some churches took, we wanna think about what our primary assignment is, as believers, as Christians, as church, which is to be the salt and the light, to go into the world and reach, the nations, to preach, but not just that alone, but also to live a lifestyle that represents Christ, that we can then be the hands and the feet of Jesus, especially in situations like that. Mm-hmm. So during COVID, yes, the states, made some laws that were not necessarily constitutionally right, and I can say that because that's what the Supreme Court said, in some of the cases I looked into. But at the same time, the position of the church was also not necessarily, to be at the expense of everybody else. Because like you said, the death of Christ and the value of life, the death of Christ actually places much more value on life. That popular Bible verse we read, for God so loved, right. Mm-hmm. So loved the world, right? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, his only son. There is some worth that God has placed on life, that he just does not want life to diminish, to die, just like that. Mm-hmm. And he wanted us to also value life in that sense. So when you think of Jesus, living the 99 and going after the one, there's a value placed on that one, So I guess my point to what I'm trying to say is this, that when the church, especially GCC in this case, and many other churches, decided, to be defiant, and not only were they defiant, but also they took the risk of, at the expense of the public, at the expense of families, at the expense of everybody else. My argument in the paper was that's not also right. There are other things we could do. I looked at what was done in 1918. During the flu, and how the church handled it, and I felt that there are better positions to take. We could still witness Christ, we could still reach the poor, we could still be who God wants us to be, in this society and in this community, than just, being quote unquote reckless, whereby the newspaper, the early times were saying that they were, without mask, hugging and shaking and all of those, and, there were cases of sicknesses here and there in the community. And even unbelievers were holding the plaques. I mean, I read that, they were holding the plaques, love your neighbors and put on a mask. I thought that was a big insult on Christianity. So.
Yeah, and there were those who were adamant about continuing to meet for public worship, and even refusing to wear masks, and we're going to continue this conversation, but just a quick, not a break, but for our audience, we actually have a survey for this, and we would love to have your feedback. If you go to our website, WarrenTheology.org, WarrenTheology.org, you'll see a survey there on our homepage. The survey is called Survey About Your Church's Response to COVID. So I know, in a sense, yes, COVID is over, but I think, at least I would love to have those numbers, or some sense of people's level of comfort as they went to church. Do you feel that your church handled the pandemic well? So some questions that we ask, and it's a very quick survey. One question is, do you feel that your church responded appropriately to COVID? Second question, did your church close in-person worship for an extended period of time, at least a month? Third question, on a scale from 0 to 5, what was the level of willingness among your church's leadership to close during the pandemic? And the last question, on a scale of 0 to 5, to what degree do you believe your church's leadership valued your life in its decision-making during the pandemic? And that's really kind of what we're focusing on now, about these churches that either refused to close in-person worship, or those who did close begrudgingly. Could the argument be made that they didn't value the lives of their attendees?
Well, I think I see where you're coming from. I don't think they would necessarily make the argument, because I think in their mind, I think they're trying to accomplish some sort of purpose. But in hindsight, taking an objective look, we could also say, well, maybe, they don't truly effectively place, enough value on the life of their members.
Mm-hmm.
Because earlier on I said, there are three institutions, right, and the family, the church, and the government. In each of these three institutions, responsibilities are placed on us, to value and to protect In a family, the father is not just the husbandman alone, but is the sense of security. Everybody runs to him. The government is supposed to be able to protect its own citizen, and the church is not excluded from that responsibility of protection either. We should be able to protect our people, to this day and age. You see in churches there are security men, there are cameras and all of those. Not necessarily because that's the primary assignment, but the church also have the responsibility of protection. I was thinking about this and recently about why did Jesus tell them to bring sword? In the garden, we're talking about the death of Christ, right? So the church does have a responsibility to protect life, and that includes the health of our members. That includes not being reckless. That includes ensuring social distancing, if that's what is necessary. That includes, coming out with creative ideas to be able to still get the gospel message, to our people. I was researching in 1918, some of the things they did to still be able to get the gospel message out was some of them got Boy Scouts, to deliver messages, pamphlets of sermons to their members. Some of them decided to go on newspapers and just take a column so that they can still preach and teach the message on a weekly basis. So, we have a responsibility to protect life of our members. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
Do you have a scripture to support that the church has a responsibility to protect physical life?
Do I have a scripture off my head? I'm trying to scan. So there are a bunch of this. I don't remember. This is just playing in my head right now. So
I know I got you in the hot.
Yeah, no, yeah, you do. They protected Paul. They lowered him down. That they helped him escape.
Yes.
Why? Because there's a bunch of what you call it, and I don't remember the scriptures, but I'm just thinking.
It's in the book of Acts.
In Acts, yes. They protected them. That, we should not necessarily be reckless. Even in the message of Paul, many times, he would tell us that, hey, listen, when you are being hacked, what's your defense for your faith? I think 1 Peter, you should be able to tell them. But at the same time, don't begin to act unnecessarily, recklessly, or, being defiant in a way to the point whereby, you are being punished for wrongdoing. Now, if you do suffer wrongdoing, if you do suffer punishment for doing the right thing, then that's different. Right. I'm trying to think, where else in scriptures where people were protected?
I think the one you gave is an excellent one.
Right.
Different than the one I thought of.
Yeah.
Because what came to my mind was John 10.
Okay.
When Jesus talked about the good shepherd who protects the sheep.
Yeah.
Now, and Dr. Rucker and I,
we talked about
we talked about this because. Audience, by the way, you all are being invited into an ongoing conversation.
Right.
So, but Dr. Rucker and I were talking about this yesterday about how John 10, and let's look it up. John chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. John chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. And I'm reading from the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible Translation.
All right.
Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. Now, I can hear my seminary professor saying already that passage, Jesus is talking about, he gives this analogy, but he is talking about spiritual protection. And his primary point is not the shepherd, protects the sheep, or that the pastor protects the congregants physically. Okay? Now, I would argue that that's not. I would agree that that's not the primary point is Jesus protects our souls. I agree that is the primary point. However, I would also have to say, how can you read that passage and not get a pastoral application out of that?
From it.
If Jesus protects our souls, okay, and he is the model of what a good spiritual leader is, and he even gives the analogy of yes, he's talking about something spiritual, but he gives an analogy of physical protection.
That's correct.
I think there is enough there to say that would include physical protection.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%.
I
I mean,
agree with you.
I'm thinking about the shepherd, the sheep, and the usage of sheep and shepherd even throughout scriptures. My mind is going back to the story in Exodus, where they were coming out of Egypt, and God just being intentional, leading them through Moses. And how he was so intentional in protecting them and providing for them all through, to the point where I think it was the Amalekites that came against them, and they had to go to battle. They had to protect their own people. You remember the story where Moses was raising his hand, and Aaron and Hur were there helping him, and Joshua was leading the battle. So the Christian life, I mean the church, there is a sense in which we can draw some application from that as well, and understand, that protection of our people, protection of the ransomed people, the saved people, is also part of the responsibility of the church.
Right. Yeah. And we know what a shepherd. I mean, we just think about what's a shepherd's job. I mean, what's his what is he there for?
And a lot of people are looking for that. When they look for a church, that's one thing that a lot of people consider. Does this church have security?
Yeah.
Does this church now they're looking at things like do they have masks available?
Right.
Do they have hand sanitizer
Proper
available
health
on different
protocols,
walls?
yeah.
The basic question that they're asking is, does this church care about my life?
Absolutely.
And my life and my health?
Right.
Very much.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's something that the church specifically needs to, I believe, grow up. Grow up and embrace. Grow up and embrace, because, sometimes we primarily tend to think that, the job of the church is just to feed the spiritual soul alone. But beyond the spiritual needs, there is much more to it. I'm thinking of when, concerns about the follow of life and protection. When they snatched, is it Peter now? Peter and Peter and John, and they were in prison. The church gathered together. They were praying. There's that concern that must be there. There is that intentionality that must be there. Not only do we call on God, but to ensure that proper protocols are in place, like hand sanitizers, like security, like cameras, all those kind of stuff. Especially in this 21st century where we live. So, yeah.
But we mention it. Think about it. You hear it all the time. It's kind of hard if somebody's hungry and you're trying to preach the gospel to them. What do you think? How effective do you think that's going to be? It's that, and I think you mentioned it before about the hierarchy of needs.
Oh yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
So if the church, if they don't have a sense of security, it's going to be hard to focus in on worship if I feel as though, my life.
Yeah, Abraham Maslow,
Right.
which you study in the discipline of psychology. And,
Right.
I'm not saying that I agree 100% with him, but
Right.
I think he made a good point that
Absolutely.
the basis, of human, I don't know, human existence, human quality of life, I suppose,
Right.
is security.
Right.
And it's hard to think of anything else.
Right.
And that's what, in John chapter 6, Jesus fed them bread
Right.
before he preached to them, I am the bread of life.
There you
Yeah.
go.
And it's hard
There
to.
you go.
Yeah.
But
There you-
I kind of want to let's make a shift back to what we were talking about. What about those churches that were defiant against the COVID-19 restriction? The reason they did it, or the given reason, was maintaining rights. Political and legal rights. And one argument that they were making, one argument that some of them was making, was if governments look for and they wait for opportunities like the COVID-19 pandemic, they wait for times of chaos and widespread distress, because it gives them an opportunity to take more individual rights, because individuals, people, citizens are not paying as much attention, because again, they're focused on their basic needs.
Yeah.
And there were some people who felt that the government coming in telling us that we cannot meet for worship, that is an overstep of government. And there are people who were concerned about religious freedom. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I might even take it a step further and say that, like the Bible says, that the government or the rulership of this world is Satan himself. And anytime he finds an opportunity to step into something that pleases God, he truly tries its possible best to ensure that, that is taken away. So, all over the world you see where governments always try to infringe on religious freedom in one way or the other, because especially when it comes to Christianity, because when you think about it, oftentimes Christianity is the one that gets to suffer a lot more when we're talking about, religious freedom and all of those. Now, of course, in recent times, there are arguments, even in the United States also, of I think in the last government period, whereby there were statements that were against maybe the Islamic people and all of those and specifically targeted. But overall, what we're saying here is the fact that the church or religion and the state should be separated to a very large extent for many reasons. Because once the government begins to dictate what you should believe in and how you should think, then you might as well be a robot. You might as well be, a slave in a sense, because, then you have no right, and, there is nothing else you could do other than what you've been dictated to. But that's not really what it should be. Christianity, freedom of religious belief, all those kind of things are things that, and I'm so glad for us in this country that our founding fathers thought so well about these things as, they were crafting the Constitution. There is a separation of states and church, that was included in the First Amendment. I mean, it was ratified in the 14th Amendment and all of those, and upheld up until now by the Supreme Court. So it's tough to think about. Rights are not to be trampled upon. However, right is also not absolute.
Right.
I say that because, I have a right to be everywhere I want to be, but that also does not mean that I can go in any way I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? And when we look at Luke chapter number 6, or even the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus was teaching, we found out that there are so many rights that he would even tell us to willingly relinquish or give out. If somebody takes your coat, let them have it. If somebody wants you to go a mile, how about you go 2 miles with them? Stuff like that. In other words, it takes Jesus basically takes the standard of rights to another level. Right. Love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and also love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, anything I can do to ensure there is peace, that's all I need to do.
Right.
Okay.
And safety of my people.
Right.
Okay.
So the Defiance, you got a point on what he was finishing, because mine might shift it to
Okay.
another direction.
Yeah.
On the
I was
Defiance.
going to. I agree. I agree with you. I agree 100% with you. I think if we don't fight for our rights, then yes, we are going to lose them. And I think that was the argument that people who are aligned politically with John MacArthur and other leaders who were defiant. I think that was the argument. If we don't fight for our individual rights, then we will lose them. However, the problem that I have, and I don't have, this is not a problem that I have as an American. This is not a problem I have as a seminarian. This is a problem I have as a fellow Christian, because I am concerned about how things reflect on Christianity. Okay. Yes, as a citizen of the United States, I have a responsibility, I believe, to defend legal and political rights. I have a responsibility to contribute to society in a way that preserves the United States government. If you are a citizen of a country, naturally, you have a responsibility to do that. I think the question is, where does that responsibility lie? Do I have that responsibility as a Christian? I have that responsibility as an American, but do I have that responsibility as a Christian?
What was it?
To preserve the whatever government that I am that I benefit from through citizenship.
Absolutely. Or
you think it's
Okay.
rooted in my Christian faith?
Well, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Actually, protecting your freedom to worship or to obey God is a biblical thing. It's not
Absolutely.
it's not a U.S. thing.
What if I disagree with that?
Who put
Well,
the government
so
in
Acts
place?
chapter number 4, verse 19 would be my answer to that. They arrested them. They arrested Peter and John, right? And then they brought them in front of the Jewish leadership. And then they were telling them, listen, you don't have to preach in this name anymore. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. They asked them. Peter and John answered whether it is right in the sight of God for us to listen to you rather than to obey God. You decide. In other words, they asked them the question, hey, listen, you guys are trying to give us a limitation on our rights. But there should be a separation between these two. Our responsibility is to God and not to you. Decide if you're bigger than God. There's a sense in which they are making their case and they are, protecting their freedom of expression. Of religious liberty, literally.
Okay.
So
did they, saying that regardless of what the law is, I am going to practice my faith. Is that taking, what legal steps did they take to protect their legal right?
No. So the Bible also teaches us to obey laws, to obey the authority. Romans chapter 13, verse 1,
That's where
we'll
I was
find that
gonna
in
go.
there.
That's where I
It
was
wants us to
going,
submit
Romans
to
13.
the governing authorities,
That's
for
exactly
us
where I was going.
in fact, it says in Romans 13 that there is no authority except, that has been given by God. So,
Right.
yes, we do have a responsibility to listen, to obey. However, when that responsibility of the government begins to infringe on our religious liberty, then we must make sure that we speak up. Now, again, how we speak up is the problem I have in my paper. How we address that is the issue I have here, because in our speaking up also, we need to remember that first of all, we are called to be salt. We are called to be salt and light in this world. And second of all, we have a primary responsibility, to witness,
Right.
and to evangelize, and to call people, to Christ and all that. So as we do all of those, there should be a balance. We should not necessarily, claim our rights at the expense of others, because then we are not being the true person that a Christian should model.
Okay. We
Doc, we got 5.
well actually got less than 5 minutes. So we want to have.
It's been a fun conversation.
We gotta,
Yes.
we're gonna have to have you back.
Yes, we are going to
Wow.
allow our. So yeah, I've loved this conversation.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you to
thank
our
you.
guest,
He's
Akinlabi.
reading my mind.
Thank you for coming. Great discussion. It has been our pleasure hosting you.
Because I got a lot more questions.
Yeah.
We got to have him back.
We believe that this conversation and others like it are what we need to what we need in order to push theological inquiry forward. We're not, or we're out. But before we go, again, we do want to say thank you to our viewers, our subscribers, our supporters, sponsors, donors, our partners. Special thank you to the sponsors of this episode, Dallas Bible Theological Institute, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, and the West Mount Moriah Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. Thank you so much for supporting this effort. If you want to join this movement by donating or becoming a sponsor, go to our website at WarrenTheology.org. Dr. Rucker?
We're also calling for papers for our quarterly journal. We publish on a number of areas within Christian studies. If you're a professor, a seminarian, or pastor who does serious academic writing, submit papers, articles, and book reviews to our editorial team, also on our website, WarrenTheology.org. And until next time, thank you.
Yes, thank you, and blessings.